Go, let's learn something. Ooh. All right, I'm going to go to my notes here. And I skipped the installation process. All right, most of you have been through that a couple of times. And again, I sent you a change for Android Studio. If you look at the installation process notes, they're probably for Eclipse. What we're going to be covering here is the basics, the stuff that you learned. All of this is stuff that you learned in programming logic beginning, with maybe the exception of custom procedures and maybe the exception of arrays. We'll talk about those. I'm not just going to dump you into them. So my instructions notes here say, let's go to Android Studio and create a new project. So up here at the top, start a new project. Once you've created a project on a machine, the next time Android Studio opens, it's going to open that same project. There is no way, like there was in Visual Studio, to double click on an SLN file and launch that project. You have to launch the studio first, and then go find the project that you want to work on. After you create the first one, unless the project moves, you move it, put it in a different location, it'll always load the last project you were working on, which is realistic, right? How long does it take to write an Android app? A real one? Probably years, or at least 6 months. Why would you want other projects coming up all the time getting in the way of that? All right, we're going to write small stuff. Let's call this one sample code. You can put spaces in there. I don't. The company domain, what does yours say? Same thing? Okay. Doesn't matter really what it says. If you do at some point decide that you want to actually publish an app that you've written in Google Play or Google Store or whatever it's called, then you need to put an actual company domain in here. You should have your own domain place because Google Store is going to ask you, where do people go to see your site? You're going to have a site. Same thing for Apple. Can't publish these things unless you have a site that people can go to. That's part of the security. So if you do have an app that's out there with viruses embedded inside it, there's a web page that people can track down and might be able to track you down. The other thing I recommend you do is change the location. This is going into your folder, Android Studio. Nah, let's put it on the desktop. Make sure it's your login and then desktop. Okay. Next, here's where you set the Android minimum SDK. There's a help me choose, don't follow. I'm just going to bring it up here real quick. This shows you that if you choose to use Android Lollipop, you're only going to cover about 9% of the current users of Android in the world with your app. The rest of them won't be able to run it because you have too much stuff in your code. If you want to cover 99%, then you should be using API level 8. For me, the compromise is around 17. So that's where mine is. If yours isn't at 17, go ahead and change the minimum SDK for 17. And let's use that throughout the course, unless there's some reason not to, or unless there's some feature that isn't in 17 that we want to learn about. Last time I taught this class, we were using 8 and got just fine. We're doing fine. When you say that the minimum SDK is 17, that means you will not be allowed to put features in your project that are only included in 18, 19, 23. You won't be able to use them. They won't even show up. So if you're doing some research and it says do this and yours doesn't have it, it could be because of that. Here in the Mac lab, because of the hacks functionality and 8 gig of RAM, we'll be able to use an Android 23 device. Emulator, because it works here. It's the only computer. Well, actually, take it back. It works on my Surface, which is interesting. But that's an 8 gigabyte RAM. It's nice. And my home computer, 8 gig of RAM, I couldn't get it to work. I had to create a new virtual machine that was based on 17, scaled back the RAM, then everything was fine. So we'll use 17. Should be okay. We're not doing any wearable devices. We're not writing any apps for TV or anything else. You can work on those in your spare time. Google Glass, for instance. Next, we'll use a blank activity. In the future, we'll use some of these others, but we're going to use a blank activity. It's kind of like an empty form. An activity in Android is basically a form or as screen. And you've got plenty of apps where you go flip, 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 and it changes screens. Each one of those will have a unique activity defined for it. You can have as many activities in an app as you want. It's kind of a strange name, but it's basically one screen. And that could be a 3-inch phone screen, a 2.5-inch watch screen, or a 50-inch TV screen. You can define all of those. So we'll do a blank activity. I don't mess with these. Each activity needs a name until we have more than one activity. Main sounds good to me. You can call it whatever you want. Later on, I tend to change them. Even main works well, but then what do you call the next one? Not so main something.
Main 2.
Main 2, no. We'll figure something out. I just leave them alone for right now. Finish. Grind, grind, grind. Be a good time to pause. Remind me to turn that back. Okay, after a couple of minutes, the recording was off. This is what you might see, but as I just mentioned before I turned on the recording, we're not ready to run yet. Why not? It's still doing stuff. It's still loading things and doing secret things behind the scenes that we're not supposed to know about. And now it's ready. Run it. Because this also takes time. The first time you load the emulator, it does take, what the book say, up to 10 minutes. What? Well, I'm going to show you a couple of tricks that will hopefully make the emulator a little bit faster. You can have multiple devices to test on. This is the only one we have right now, so we're going to use that one. It works on the Mac. As I said, it works on my Surface, but I have not had any luck getting it to work on my old crusty laptops or any of those other things. So that's the only one. If you build another one, you choose that one. Click on OK. And now it's grinding, grinding, grinding.
So we don't have that emulator?
Yeah,
You don't have an emulator at all?
It's just a gray screen.
Yeah, it's also not a gray screen.
Look in the bottom right hand corner. Is there like a bar moving?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's still indexing.
It's still indexing. You just gotta.
Okay, if your run button is still not green, then you're not done yet. So mine went a little faster. Okay, I'm going to pause. Pause again. Okay, when my emulator comes up, it comes up in the welcome screen. Okay. And to get this thing to actually go, you have to unlock it. If you click in here, you drag around, might have to swipe up to unlock it. Now, Lyle's question is, should mine say hello world? That's what it says over here. Oh, really? You can see that? You can zoom in, and it says hello world. Here's the zoom in button over here. So yeah, when you create a new project in Android, it's the same in iOS as well now. It automatically gives you a hello world project, and we can change that. So that's automatic. Now here's the key, folks. That took a long time, right? 3-4 minutes. Felt like longer, but it was about 3 or 4 minutes. Leave it. Because if I change things, and I leave that running, it doesn't have to reload all the stuff. It just stays there, and as soon as you hit run again, it will replace that one. I think I can show you without even changing it. We'll talk about changing it here in just a minute. But if I run it again, it's going to tell the emulator, hey, I got a new version of this program. It erases the old version of the program and immediately launches the new one. Can you handle that speed? Yeah. If you can't, I have a drop form. iOS emulator is about that same problem. It takes a while to get started. Once it runs, then you're good. Okay, questions about creating a project, running it? Just be patient. Wait for that green arrow to light up, then you should be able to run it. For those of you who don't have emulators installed, that was a flaw in the installation. I'll work on it during the break here. As far as I know, there's 3 of you, right? Those two, Isaac? Anybody else? Everybody else has got a phone that says hello world, right? Okay. Now let's take a look at what happened in our project. This is our project folder. If you were back in Visual Studio, this is the Solution Explorer that was over here. This is everything that is necessary for your project to run. And that whole structure of manifests and Java files and res stands for resource. On my, I don't quite know why, but on my Surface it doesn't say res, it says resources. Why? But this one says resources. These are all the resources. If you're going to have graphics in here, they go into the images, the drawable folder. You put them in there. You have to actually copy them in there so that your app can use them. What you're seeing, so this is the layout. We'll talk about all those pieces, parts as we go. To the right of that, this is your toolbox. In Android, they're called widgets, but you can see there's different kinds. There's tables, there's grids. We'll talk about the layouts a little later. There's text boxes, large text boxes, small, actually those are labels. Buttons, radio buttons, check boxes, switches, toggles, image buttons, etc. Stuff that you're used to. Those are your widgets. And this is why we're using Android Studio, because it is definitely possible to drag from here to here, move them around, and lay out screens. That's fairly new. Last time I taught this class 2 years ago, that was way in the future. We had to manually type where do we want these things to lay out on the screen, and it took most of our programming time to lay out screens. So this is a little bit better. Down at the bottom, underneath your widgets, there are two tabs. One says Design, that lets you see this emulator, or this is just a screen layout. It will not run. We'll show you what the screen looks like. But there's no Run button here, so you can't test your code behind the scenes, but you can at least see in advance what the screen is going to look like. If you want to, you can, and we will, you can click on the text option here, and it'll bring up the text that causes this layout to occur. We look at it carefully. There's a bunch of overhead stuff, a bunch of padding around the edges and things, what that's all about. But then there's a text view. That's what labels in Android are called. They're text views. That's this guy, the hello world. That's a text view. And its text says hello world. Really? Does yours say that? No. And if I click on mine, I'll bet you it goes away. There it goes. What the heck is that? This says, if I zoomed in on this, says hello world with a capital H and a comma and an exclamation mark. I don't see those here. What's with this @string hello world? That's a constant. What? It's a constant. So this is saying, go get me the constant called, that's the name of the constant, hello_world. Go get me the constant called hello world and bring me its text, and we're going to stuff that in here. Seem a little convoluted? Why can't we just type hello world in there and call it? You can. Where do we find this constant? It's stored in the strings, which is one of the values over the scope. Expand the values list. And here's a string XML file. Note that everything here is XML or something. It's all text-based. This is what allows you to pick up this project that you've built on a Mac and run it on your Windows machine. You're going to build most of these on your Mac, and I'm going to grade them at home on my Windows machine. Lost my Mac. Some instructor, new guy, took it. Let's open up the strings. Inside there's two strings, including one called hello_world, whose text is capital H, exclamation mark, etc. So if you want to change the string, change it here. Take out the word world and put in your first name. And when you're done, hit run. And in a little bit, you can bypass this guy. We only have one emulator. You can tell it to always use this emulator. Quit asking me. Notice this is in the active devices, by the way. If you plug in your phone or your tablet, it'll show up in the active devices if you get it plugged in right. You can actually run it on your device, and that happens just like that. There's no recreating your device. And in a little while, hopefully not too long, notice this is taking a little longer. Why? Because it has to recompile. The last time there was nothing to recompile. I never changed anything. Congratulations, you're writing code. Good team.
Weeks after.
Okay, how do I get back to that layout thing? Right. So some of you see the actual phone here on the side of this. No, not in here, you wouldn't. We can close these, or there's tabs across the top and you can bounce back and forth. Here's the text that was behind the scenes. And if you want to go back to here, you can as well. Well, we haven't been there yet, I'm sorry. Back to here. And if you don't need to see the code, this is the code that causes this screen to display. This is going to get much, much larger as we add new things to the form. If you want to go back to design view, go back to design view and the code goes away. To collapse these, this is the little collapse icon over here. This is the log of when you ran your program. Most of this means nothing to anybody, at least not to me. We just hide that, get a little more screen space. This view here, or the simulator, is clickable. So we can click on that text view, and let's just delete it. Press the delete key, and just like anywhere else, it's gone. It looks like a phone. How cool is that? If you want it to look like something else, up there where it says Nexus 4, you can drop it down and make it look like something else. Let's just stick with the Nexus 4. Now I want to put a label on there. Well, I just deleted one. That's right. Get a little practice putting one on the form here. So I'm going to take a medium text. I think that's the one I want. This is a plain text view. Let's try medium text. And just drag it. And notice you get a kind of alignment line that's centered in the screen. I want it in the upper left. And now it's just a little bit bigger, so it's easier for us to see. But it's still a label. This is not an input box. That's a different kind of field. You're going to have to, all of you are C# Visual Studio people. A lot of these things have different names. I want this one to fill the screen. You can resize it. Click it. Maybe not. And drag. Now the box is bigger. So now we have room for multiple lines of output. What we're going to do, and you might remember this in a few of my C# examples, where we just had this big old text box and we threw a bunch of stuff in, right? That's what we're going to use, just one big, huge text box. But in order to use that text box, we have to give it a name. In Visual Studio, it was its name. Here they have IDs. I like to use my standard, put a prefix on it. So this is a text view, so I'm going to use TV. This is all optional. You can name these objects whatever you want. I like to put a prefix on them to designate what type of object it is. If you just want to call it my results, you can. I'm going to call it TV results using Camelback. That's just my style. I'm not going to be real picky. I'm a substitute teacher. I don't care if you document the heck out of your code. I don't care if you follow Brent's standards or even mine. If I can read your code, I'm good. Doesn't mean the rules change. Don't go to Brent's class and say, but Volker said we don't have to document anything anymore. I'm just a campus dean. What the heck do I know? He has his standards, I have mine. When I practiced this, for some reason, this medium text was sitting in the middle, up and down, vertically centered. Maybe it's because I made it medium text instead. I'm just going to experiment for a second. You don't have to follow here. I'm going to select that and delete it again. And I'm going to grab just a plain old text view, park that in here, and stretch it and see what it does. No, I did it. So I don't know what I did wrong. But on one of mine, the text was in the middle. And I didn't want that. So how do you change it? Well, it's called alignment, right? So we go look for it. No, sorry. You're not in C# anymore. In Android, in the Android Studio, this is called a gravity. Where's the text? How is gravity affecting this text? If you drop this list down, you can tell it that I want it to align on the bottom right. So it's just one of those things I want to point out to you, because when I did the sample, for some reason, my text was centered vertically. I don't know why. And what happens when you do both? It says, what, are you kidding me? There we go. It's still centered. It's not centered. Oh, it's on the bottom. I can put it wherever I want, centered vertically. Nope, I want it at the top. Well, then you have to remember, turn this one off. These ought to be radio buttons, but they're not that smart. I think it just takes the first one that it hits that makes sense, and then ignores all the rest. So you can manipulate those. When you're doing your homework assignment, you probably want your text to be in the top left, so just manipulate it so that it goes into the top left, and you should be okay. Bunch of other things you can do here. Let's change its text, because right now it says medium text. That's kind of lame. There is a text property. My advice to you is go with your gut. What did you learn? What would you call it? See if it's there. If it's not, Google it. And let's just put the word results here. Oops. You got to click and then click in the box next to it to edit. And now we have a place to put our program's output. I don't have any inputs. I don't want to get into that. We could, but I'm not going to get into that. I want to teach you some Java when we get back from break. And we're going to use this as our output. So whenever we run, it's just going to do a bunch of calculations and show us the results. No input from the user yet. That's coming later. Questions? Okay, so let's pause there. When we come back from the break, we'll take a look at how do we write code to change what appears here on the fly instead of at design time.